The signal came through space like a whisper of pain. It traveled for months across the dark between stars, carrying with it the hopes of a dying world. When it finally reached the human ship UES Liberty, the crew had no idea they were about to change the galaxy forever. Commander Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the communication officer called out. The young woman looked confused as she stared at her screens. She had been working with space communications for 5 years but had never seen anything like this. "Sir, we have something strange coming through the long-range receivers," she said. "It is not like any signal in our database." Jake put down his coffee and walked over to her station. The display showed waves of sound that moved up and down in patterns that looked almost like music. But there was something sad about it, something that made him feel uncomfortable. "Can you clean it up?" he asked. "I am trying, sir, but it will take time. The signal is very weak and it is coming from far away." Jake nodded and went back to his command chair. The Liberty was on patrol duty near the edge of human space. It was boring work most of the time. They checked shipping routes and looked for pirates. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. 3 days later, Dr. Lisa Parker finally cracked the code. She was the ship's language expert and had spent those 3 days working without much sleep. Her eyes were red and tired, but she was smiling when she called Jake to her lab. "Captain, you need to hear this," she said. Her voice was shaking a little. Jake looked at the small speaker on her desk. "What is it?" "Just listen." She pressed a button and the voice that came out was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It was musical and beautiful, but also filled with fear and sadness. The words were in perfect English, translated by Lisa's computer. "To anyone who can hear this message, we are the Kalari people of the Kalaros star system. Our worlds are burning. The Vorthic Empire has come to destroy us. We have waited 17 years for someone to help us. We are not fighters. We do not know how to make war. Our peaceful ways have left us with no defense against their weapons. If there are warriors among the stars who fight for what is right, we beg you to help us. Please, we are dying." The message repeated 3 more times, then stopped. Jake and Lisa sat in silence for a long moment. "Where did this come from?" Jake asked quietly. Lisa checked her computer.
"The Kalaros system."
"It is about 3 weeks away if we push the engines hard." Jake thought about this. He had heard stories about the Vorthak Empire from other ship captains. They were bad news. Really bad news. They conquered worlds and enslaved entire species. No one had ever been able to stop them. "What do we know about these Kalari people?" he asked. Lisa pulled up another screen. "Not much. There are some old survey reports from 50 years ago. They seem to be a peaceful species. They build beautiful cities and make art. No military to speak of." Jake stood up and paced around the small lab. His orders were clear. "Stay on patrol. Watch for pirates. Do not leave the assigned area without permission from Earth Command." But he kept hearing that voice so full of hope and fear. He went back to the bridge and called his senior officers together. Lieutenant Commander Amy Davis was his second in command. She was smart and tough but always followed orders. Sergeant Danny Martinez ran the Marine unit. He was a fighter who never backed down from a challenge. "We have a situation," Jake told them. He played the message for them. Amy shook her head when it was done. "Sir, our orders are to stay in this sector. We cannot just leave to chase after distress calls." Danny leaned forward in his chair. "Those people are asking for help. Are we just going to ignore them?" "It is not our job to fight the Vorthak Empire," Amy said. "We are one ship against their entire fleet." Jake looked at both of them. Amy was right about their orders. But Danny was right about helping people in need. That was why they had joined the military in the first place. "How long would it take to get to Kalaros?" he asked. Amy checked her tablet. 3 weeks at maximum speed. "But sir, if we leave now, Earth Command will want to know why." Jake made his decision. "Set course for the Kalaros system." "Full speed, sir?" Amy looked shocked. "Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them we are responding to a humanitarian crisis. We can deal with the paperwork later." Danny smiled. "Yes, sir. I will get my Marines ready." Amy still looked worried. "Captain, what if this is a trap? What if the Vorthak are using this signal to lure ships into their territory?" Jake had thought about this too. "Then we will be walking into the biggest fight of our lives. But we cannot let innocent people die when we might be able to help them." The Liberty turned toward the Kalaros system and jumped into hyperspace. The crew worked hard to prepare for whatever they might find. The Marines checked their weapons and armor. The engineers made sure all systems were running perfectly. The medical team got ready to treat wounded civilians, but none of them knew what they were really getting into. They did not know that the Kalari were not the only ones who would learn something new. The humans were about to discover just how different they were from every other species in the galaxy. They were about to learn why Earth was called a death world, and why humans were the most dangerous species anyone had ever met. The journey to Kelleros took exactly 21 days. When they finally arrived at the edge of the system, what they saw made everyone on the bridge go quiet. 2 planets were dark. No lights, no signals, nothing but dead rock floating in space. A 3rd planet was covered in smoke and fire. And everywhere, like metal sharks in the water, were the ships of the Vorthak Empire. Jake counted 47 enemy vessels. Each one was 3 times bigger than the Liberty. They had enough firepower to destroy entire continents. "Sir," Amy said quietly. "What are your orders?" Jake looked at the tactical display. By every rule of military strategy, they should turn around and run. They were outnumbered 47-1. The enemy ships were bigger and stronger. Any sane commander would retreat and call for backup. But Jake Morrison had grown up on Earth. He had learned to fight in the streets of Detroit. He had survived training in the Amazon jungle and the deserts of Australia. He came from a world where everything tried to kill you every single day, and humans from Deathworlds did not run from bullies. "Take us in," he ordered. "Let's go save some people." The Kalari ship that met them looked like it was made of glass and light. It moved through space without any sound, graceful like a bird flying through air. When it docked with the Liberty, Jake and his team got their first look at the people they had come to save. Elder Zephyra was the leader of the Kalari Council. She stood only 4 feet tall, and her body was made of something that looked like living crystal. Light moved through her skin in soft colors that changed as she talked. Behind her were 6 other Kalari, all just as beautiful and delicate. When they saw the humans, they stopped moving. Jake realized they were afraid. He tried to smile in a friendly way, but he could see it did not help much. Next to the Kalari, the humans looked like giants. Jake was 6 feet tall and built like a soldier. His arms and shoulders were thick with muscle. His eyes faced forward like a hunter. "Welcome," Zephyra said through a translation device. Her voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We are grateful that someone answered our call for help." "We came as soon as we got your message," Jake said. He tried to speak softly so he would not scare them more. Zephyra's light dimmed a little. "Forgive me, but we do not know your species. We had hoped for aid from one of the great warrior races. The Korthani are famous battle singers. The Thorani are weapon masters who have fought for 1,000 years. But you are unknown to us." Sergeant Danny Martinez stepped forward. He was grinning, which made him look even more dangerous. "Ma'am, with respect, I think you might be surprised by what humans can do." Dr. Lisa Parker was scanning the Kalari with her medical equipment. Her eyes got wider as she read the results. "Captain, you need to see this. Their bones are 10 times lighter than ours. Their muscles are designed for fine work, not strength. And their homeworld has gravity that is less than 1/3 of Earth's." "What does this mean?" Zephyra asked. Jake thought carefully about how to explain. "It means that while your people were learning to make beautiful art and study the stars, my people were learning how to survive on a world that tries to kill us every day." Through the windows of the Kalari ship, they could see the Vorthak fleet. The enemy ships were huge and covered with weapons. They moved in perfect formation like a military parade. Each one could destroy a city with a single shot. "The Vorthak have conquered 17 different species," Zephyra explained. Her crystal body grew darker as she spoke. "Their warriors are 8 feet tall and covered in living metal armor. They know no fear and show no mercy. Their ships carry weapons that can crack planets open. How can one small vessel stand against such power?" Lieutenant Commander Amy Davis was studying the enemy fleet on her tablet. She was smiling, which surprised the Kalari. "Captain, I count 47 hostile vessels in the system." "What is your point, Commander?" "Well, sir, back in the academy they taught us that fair fights are for people who do not want to win." Jake nodded slowly. He looked at Zephyra and her people. They were beautiful and peaceful and completely helpless. They had never learned to fight because they had never needed to. Their world was safe and kind. Earth was not safe or kind. Earth was a death world where humans had learned to survive by being smarter, meaner, and more stubborn than anything else on the planet. "Elder Zephyra," Jake said, "I think it is time you learned about something humans call asymmetric warfare." The Kalari did not understand at first. They thought warfare meant big ships fighting other big ships in space. They thought it meant armies marching against each other in open battle. They had studied the military history of other species and thought they knew how war worked. They were wrong. Jake explained how humans fought. We do not always try to be stronger than our enemies. Sometimes we try to be smarter. We attack where they are weak instead of where they are strong. We use their size against them. We make them fight our kind of battle instead of theirs. But they have so many ships, one of the younger Kalari said, and each ship has thousands of warriors. Danny Martinez laughed. Kid, you know what the best thing about big ships is? They are really hard to hide. And you know what the best thing about thousands of warriors is? They all have to eat and sleep and breathe air. Dr. Lisa Parker was still studying the scans of the Vorthak fleet. Captain, their ships are designed for traditional space combat. Heavy armor, massive guns, defensive formations. But look at this, she showed him her screen. Their hulls are thick, but their docking bays are lightly defended. They expect enemies to attack from the outside. Interesting, Jake said. What else? Their power systems are centralized. If you could get inside and damage the right components, you could disable an entire ship without destroying it. Amy Davis looked up from her tactical analysis. Sir, they are running standard patrol patterns. Very predictable. They have scout ships, but they are checking for other fleets, not small craft. Jake turned back to Zephyra. Elder, how many of your people are still alive on the planets below? Perhaps 1 million on Kelleros Prime, but they are trapped in shelters underground. The Vorthak bomb the surface every day. And how many Vorthak ships are in orbit around the planet? 12 of their largest vessels. Jake smiled, and for a moment he looked as dangerous as any predator. Perfect. Elder Zephyra, I want you to do something for me. I want you to send a message to your people on the surface. Tell them to get ready. Ready for what? Ready to learn that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. The Kalari still did not understand. They could not imagine how one human ship could fight an entire Vorthak fleet. They had spent their whole lives believing that military strength came from having bigger weapons and more soldiers, but humans came from a world where the biggest and strongest creatures were often the first to die. On Earth, survival went to the clever and the adaptable. It went to the species that could turn any environment into a weapon and any weakness into a strength. As Jake began to explain his plan, the Kalari listened with growing amazement. The humans were not going to fight a space battle at all. They were going to fight like pirates and terrorists and guerrilla warriors. They were going to turn the Vorthak's own ships against them. This is madness, whispered one of the Kalari council members. No, Jake said quietly. This is how humans fight. And Elder Zephyra, yes? Before this is over, your people are going to learn how to fight too. The crystal being's light flickered with something that might have been hope. You truly believe we can defeat them? Jake looked out at the Vorthak fleet. 47 ships full of professional soldiers who had conquered half the galaxy. Any rational person would say the humans had no chance. But Jake Morrison was not rational. He was human. And humans had learned long ago that the word impossible was just another word for a problem they had not solved yet. Elder, he said, let me tell you about what we call the human spirit. The attack began at 3 a.m. when most of the Vorthak crew would be sleeping. The Liberty moved through space like a ghost, running on minimum power with all lights turned off. The ship was covered with special paint that made it invisible to enemy sensors. Sergeant Danny Martinez led the first team of Marines. They wore black armor and carried weapons that made no sound. Their faces were painted with dark colors so they would be harder to see. To the Kalari watching from their hidden ships, the humans looked like creatures from a nightmare. The target was the Vorthak flagship, a massive ship called Destroyer of Hopes. It was 3 miles long and carried 10,000 enemy soldiers. According to all military thinking, attacking such a ship with 20 Marines was suicide. Danny Martinez did not care about military thinking. He cared about getting the job done. The Marines used small cutting tools to make a hole in the ship's hull near the engine section. They moved quietly through the corridors like shadows. The Vorthak had sensors that could detect large groups of enemies, but they were not designed to notice a few humans crawling through maintenance tunnels. The first Vorthak patrol found their security station had been destroyed with plastic explosives. The second patrol discovered that something had been put into the air system that made their eyes water and their throats burn. The third patrol found that all the lights on 3 entire decks had been shot out, leaving them stumbling in complete darkness. The humans, meanwhile, wore special goggles that let them see in the dark. They moved through the ship like they owned it, setting bombs and breaking important equipment. War Leader Krex was the commander of the Vorthak fleet. He was 8 feet tall and covered in armor that looked like it was alive. His weapons could kill a human from half a mile away. He had conquered dozens of worlds and never known defeat. When the alarms started going off, he could not believe what his officers were telling him. "Impossible," he roared. "No enemy has boarded this ship. Our sensors show nothing." "War Leader," said his security chief, 3 power generators have been destroyed. The atmospheric processors are malfunctioning, and we have lost contact with engineering sections 4 through 7. Krex activated the ship's communication system. His voice boomed through every corridor and room. "This is not honorable combat. Face us in proper battle." Danny Martinez's voice came back over the speakers. He sounded calm and almost friendly. "Honor is for people who can afford it. We have got people to save." While the Marines were tearing apart the flagship from the inside, Captain Jake Morrison was showing the Vorthak fleet another human invention: fighter tactics. The Liberty launched 12 small fighter craft. Each one was no bigger than a Vorthak escape pod and carried only 2 crew members. According to traditional space combat doctrine, they were useless against large warships. The Vorthak had not learned about traditional human stubbornness. Pilot Steve Walsh found himself flying through a storm of enemy fire. The massive Vorthak cannons were trying to hit his tiny fighter, but they moved too slowly. Steve twisted and turned his craft like he was surfing through the air. His adrenaline was pumping so hard he felt like he could fly forever. "Yeehaw!" he shouted over the radio. "This is better than racing speeders back on Earth." The other pilots were having just as much fun. They flew in patterns that made no sense to the Vorthak commanders. Sometimes they attacked alone. Sometimes they worked in groups. Sometimes they pretended to run away, then came back when the enemy was not expecting them. But the most important thing they did was make the Vorthak ships shoot at each other. Pilot Jenny white dove her fighter between 2 Vorthak cruisers just as they were firing their main guns. The enemy commanders could not stop shooting in time. Both ships hit each other instead of the small human craft. "Oops," Jenny said over the radio. "That looked expensive." Dr. Lisa Parker was watching everything from the Liberty's bridge. She was taking notes on how the Vorthak were responding to human tactics. "Captain, they are completely confused. They keep trying to fight us like we are another fleet of big ships, and what do you mean?" Jake asked. "They are using textbook space combat formations, coordinated fire patterns, standard Imperial tactics. They have no idea how to fight against guerrilla warfare." Jake nodded as he watched another Vorthak ship go dark, its crew abandoning it rather than face more human boarding parties. "That is because they have been fighting civilized species. They have never met anyone crazy enough to bring knife fights to a gun battle and win." The battle raged for 6 hours. By the end, half the Vorthak fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships were trying to retreat, but the human fighters were chasing them like wolves hunting deer. But the most important change was happening. On the planet below, Elder Zephyra stood in an underground shelter holding a weapon she had taken from a dead Vorthak soldier. Her crystal hands were shaking, but her voice was steady as she spoke to her people. "For too long we have believed that peace means we cannot fight," she said. "But the humans have shown us something different. Peace is not about being weak. Peace is about being strong enough to protect what you love." Around her, 1,000 Kalari were learning to use captured enemy weapons. They were awkward and frightened, but they were learning. The humans had sent down instructors who taught them how to move quietly, how to set traps, and how to turn their own knowledge of their world into a weapon. "Remember," said Marine Instructor Kelly Brooks, "you are not trying to be soldiers. You are trying to be survivors. Use what you know. Use your size. Use your world. Make them fight your fight, not theirs." The Kalari learned quickly. They were small and could hide in places the big Vorthak warriors could not reach. They knew every tunnel and cave on their planet. And most importantly, they were fighting for their homes and families. When the Vorthak sent ground troops to the surface, they found themselves fighting an enemy they could not see. The Kalari would attack, then disappear into hiding places that had been secret for generations. They would set traps in places only they knew about. They would strike without warning, then vanish like ghosts. War leader Krex received reports from the surface that made no sense. His ground commanders were reporting that the peaceful Kalari had somehow become dangerous guerrilla fighters overnight. How is this possible? He demanded. His intelligence officer was a nervous creature from a species the Vorthak had conquered years ago. My lord, the humans have done something we have never seen before. They have taught the Kalari to fight. Taught them? Yes, my lord. They have not made them stronger, or given them better weapons. They have simply shown them how to use what they already have. The Kalari know their world better than we do. They are smaller and can hide where we cannot follow. The humans have turned these advantages into weapons. Krex stared at the tactical displays. For the first time in his 300 years of conquest, he was losing a battle, not because his enemies were stronger, but because they were smarter. On the Liberty's bridge, Jake was receiving surrender requests from 17 different Vorthak ships. The mighty empire that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was asking for mercy from a single human vessel and some hastily trained civilians. Sir, Amy Davis reported, they are offering to leave the system immediately. Full reparations for damage to Kalari worlds. They want safe passage out of the area. Jake looked at the planet below where Kalari and human forces were working together to round up the last enemy soldiers. Tell them they can leave. But give them a message from me. What message, sir? Jake smiled grimly. Tell them that Earth remembers its friends, and if they ever come back here, they will find out what humans do to people who hurt our friends. The Vorthak fleet limped away into hyperspace. Behind them, they left a galaxy that had suddenly discovered something new: hope. The age of Vorthak dominance was ending. The age of human influence was about to begin. 3 days after the battle, War Leader Krex stood in what was left of his command center aboard the Eternal Dominion. His living armor was cracked and burned from human weapons that should not have been able to hurt him. The tactical display showed something that had never happened before in Vorthak history: complete defeat by a smaller force. Explain this to me, he demanded of his intelligence officer. How does one primitive ship and 200 savages destroy the 47th Conquest Fleet? The intelligence officer was a pale creature with tentacles instead of arms. His species had been conquered by the Vorthak 50 years ago. Now he trembled as he consulted his datapad. War Leader, we have studied their methods extensively. These humans do not fight like any known species in the galaxy. Be specific. They treat war like a puzzle to be solved, not a contest of strength. When we corner them, they escape through maintenance shafts too small for our warriors. When we adapt our ship formations to track their fighters, they abandon their craft and continue fighting inside our hulls. They make our size work against us. Through the damaged windows of the command center, Krex could see something that made his warrior's heart feel cold with fear. Kalari refugees were manning captured Vorthak weapons under human instruction. The peaceful crystal beings had learned to fight in just 3 days. Elder Zephyra herself stood next to Sergeant Martinez, holding a plasma rifle with steady hands. Her transparent body glowed with new confidence as she taught other Kalari how to use the weapon. The humans have done the impossible, the intelligence officer continued. They have turned prey animals into predators, not through genetic changes or advanced technology, but through education. They are teaching an entire species to be warriors. Krex felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of conquest: genuine fear. Not fear of death in battle, which was honorable, but fear of being outsmarted by creatures he had thought were inferior. On the Liberty's bridge, Captain Jake Morrison was coordinating what would later be called the Kelleros Reversal. It was the first time in recorded galactic history that a peaceful species had successfully defended itself against the Vorthak Empire. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Amy Davis reported, we are receiving surrender requests from 23 Vorthak vessels. They want immediate safe passage out of the system. What about reparations for the planets they attacked? Jake asked. They are offering full compensation and immediate withdrawal from all Kalari territory. They also want to establish a non-aggression treaty. Dr. Lisa Parker looked up from her cultural analysis station. Her eyes were wide with amazement. Captain, this is unprecedented. The Vorthak have never offered terms to anyone before. They either conquer completely or fight until total extinction. Jake studied the tactical display. Human fighters were escorting captured Vorthak ships to designated surrender zones. Kalari ground forces were helping human Marines process thousands of enemy prisoners. Everything was going according to plan, but Jake knew this was about more than one battle. Word of what happened here would spread across the galaxy. Every species that had lived in fear of the Vorthak for generations would learn that the Empire could be defeated. "Sir," Amy said quietly, "what are your orders regarding their surrender requests?" Jake thought about the 2 dead planets they had seen when they first arrived. He thought about the million Kalari who had been hiding in underground shelters for 17 years. He thought about all the other species across the galaxy who were probably suffering under Vorthak rule right now. "Accept their surrender," he said finally, "but give them a message. Tell them that Earth has made its first friend in this part of the galaxy, and humans take care of their friends." The communication went out on all frequencies. Within hours, it was being repeated on every civilized world within 50 light years. The message was simple but clear. Humanity had arrived in galactic politics. Down on Kelleros Prime, something even more important was happening. In the ruins of what had been the planet's largest city, humans and Kalari were working together to rebuild. But they were not just rebuilding buildings. They were rebuilding an entire way of thinking. Marine instructor Kelly Brooks was teaching a group of young Kalari how to set up defensive positions. "Remember," she said, "the goal is not to be the toughest fighter. The goal is to make sure you go home safe and the bad guys do not." One of her students, a young Kalari whose family had been killed in the first attacks, raised his crystal hand. "Instructor Brooks, what do we do if we face an enemy we cannot defeat?" Kelly smiled the kind of smile that had terrified Vorthak warriors across 3 star systems. "Kid, here is the thing about humans. We do not believe in enemies we cannot defeat. We just believe in enemies we have not figured out how to beat yet." Elder Zafira was listening from nearby. She had been meeting with Captain Morrison about establishing a permanent defense force for the Kalari worlds. The idea still seemed strange to her people, but she was beginning to understand its importance. "Captain Morrison," she said later as they stood in the ruins of the old Crystal Palace, "when we sent our distress call, we asked for warriors to save us. We never imagined we were asking for teachers." Jake looked around at the Kalari and human teams working together. Some were clearing rubble. Others were setting up communication equipment. A few were teaching Kalari children how to play human games that would help them think tactically. "Elder," he said, "sometimes the best way to help people is not to fight their battles for them. It is to teach them that they never needed saving in the first place. They just needed to learn how to save themselves." The transformation was happening faster than anyone had expected. Within a week, other species began sending representatives to Kelleros Prime. The ancient Thorani weapon masters, who had thought themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy, requested exchange programs with human military academies. The Korthani battle singers wanted to learn human tactical songs. The peaceful Gentarim asked for instruction in defensive strategies. Even some former Vorthak subject species began quietly asking for help in preparing their own liberation movements. Dr. Lisa Parker was documenting everything for Earth Command. "Captain, we have started something that is going to change the entire balance of power in this region of space." Jake nodded. He had received new orders from Earth just that morning. 3 more species had formally requested human assistance against various threats. The UES Liberty was being assigned to a new organization called the Galactic Defense Initiative. But the most important change was happening in the minds of ordinary beings across dozens of worlds. For the first time in centuries, species that had accepted oppression as inevitable were beginning to believe they could fight back. On the former Vorthak world of Nexus 7, slaves were whispering about the Kelleros liberation. On Thorani Prime, young warriors were asking their elders about human fighting methods. On distant Korthani stations, battle singers were composing new songs about the day the predators learned to fear their prey. War leader Krex received reports from across the Empire. Rebellion was breaking out on 17 different worlds. Subject species that had been obedient for generations were suddenly demanding freedom. Many of them were specifically asking for human military advisors. "This is a disaster," he told the High Command. "We are not just losing territory. We are losing the fear that has kept our empire together for 1,000 years. The High Command's response was swift and decisive. For the first time in Vorthak history, they declared a general armistice and requested peace negotiations with the emerging human-led coalition. As Jake prepared the Liberty for its next mission, He stood on the observation deck looking out at Celeros Prime. The planet was still scarred from the war, but it was healing. More importantly, it was defended. The Kalari had built their first military academy and were training their first generation of soldiers. They would never again have to wait for salvation from the stars. They had learned to create their own salvation, and across the galaxy, other species were learning the same lesson. The age of helpless victims was ending. The age of self-determination had begun. 6 months after the liberation of Celeros Prime, Captain Jake Morrison stood in the newly built Celeros Defense Academy, watching something that would have been impossible just a year ago. Elder Zephyro was teaching advanced tactical planning to a classroom filled with students from 6 different species. The academy was built into the crystal cliffs overlooking the main city. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see human and Kalari patrol ships working together on their daily rounds. The sight still amazed him. Half a year ago, the Kalari had never built a single warship. Now they had a small but effective defense fleet. The key to asymmetric warfare, Zephyro was explaining to her students, is to never fight your enemy's battle. Force them to fight yours instead. Use your knowledge of local conditions. Use your size advantages. Most importantly, use their expectations against them. In the front row, a young Thorani warrior raised his scaled hand. Elder Zephyra, how do we overcome our natural instincts for honorable combat? Zephira's crystal form flickered with amusement. Honor is important, young Korvac, but there is no honor in letting innocent people die because you were too proud to fight smart instead of fighting fair. Jake smiled as he listened. The Kalari had not just learned to fight. They had learned to think like humans. They were teaching other species that survival was more important than tradition. Dr. Lisa Parker approached him from across the Academy's main hall. She was now the chief anthropologist for the Galactic Defense Initiative, and spent her time studying how different species adapted to human military thinking. Captain, the transformation has been remarkable, she said, showing him her latest report. We now have formal defense agreements with 12 species. 8 more have requested training programs. The Vorthak Empire has lost control of over 30 systems in the last 6 months. Through the Academy windows, they could see construction crews building new facilities. The original Academy had been designed for a few hundred Kalari students. Now it needed to accommodate thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds. The success had created new challenges. Each species learned differently and had different natural abilities. The aquatic Meridians could not use standard human weapons, but were excellent at underwater sabotage. The insectoid Kylix had natural teamwork instincts that made them perfect for coordinated operations. Sergeant Danny Martinez walked up to join them. He now wore the insignia of a senior instructor and was responsible for training the Academy's combat programs. His latest class was a mixed group of young Kalari, former Vorthak soldiers who had defected, and Thorani warriors who wanted to learn human tactics. Captain, he said with a grin, you should see what these kids can do now. Last week, my advanced class ran a simulation against a Vorthak battle group. They won without firing a single shot. How? Jake asked. They hacked the enemy communications and convinced the Vorthak ships that they were under attack by a massive fleet. The enemy spent 4 hours shooting at each other while the kids just watched from a safe distance. Lisa shook her head in amazement. They are learning to think like humans, but they are not becoming human. They are becoming better versions of themselves. The proof of this was happening all across the galaxy. On Thorani Prime, young warriors were learning that true courage sometimes meant retreating to fight another day. On Meridian Deep, aquatic beings were developing new forms of underwater warfare that combined their natural abilities with human tactical thinking. Even more importantly, species that had been enemies for generations were learning to work together. The ancient rivalry between the Thorani and the Korthani had ended when both species realized they faced common threats that required cooperation to defeat. Jake received a message on his communicator. New orders from Earth Command. The success of the Galactic Defense Initiative had attracted attention from species across 3 different spiral arms of the galaxy. 5 more requests for assistance had come in just this week, but the message also contained troubling news. The Vorthak Empire was not finished. They had retreated to their core systems and were building new ships with new tactics specifically designed to counter human strategies. They are learning too, Jake said after reading the full report. The next time we face them, they will be ready for guerrilla warfare and asymmetric tactics. Danny nodded grimly. Then we will have to teach our allies something new. What do you mean? How to adapt. How to change tactics when the enemy changes theirs. How to think on their feet and come up with solutions nobody has ever tried before. This was the real lesson humans were teaching the galaxy. Not just how to fight, but how to think. How to look at any problem and find a way to solve it. How to turn disadvantages into advantages and weaknesses into strengths. Elder Zephyra finished her class and walked over to join them. Her crystal body was stronger now, reinforced with trace metals that made her more durable in combat situations. But the most important change was in her bearing. She carried herself like a leader who had learned that peace was something you had to be strong enough to protect. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I have been thinking about our next step." "What do you mean?" "We have learned to defend ourselves. We have taught others to defend themselves. But there are still millions of beings across the galaxy who live under oppression. Species that do not even know it is possible to fight back." Jake understood what she was suggesting. The Galactic Defense Initiative had been reactive, responding to requests for help, but maybe it was time to be proactive. "Are you suggesting we actively seek out oppressed species and offer them training?" "Not just training," Zephyra said. "Hope. The knowledge that they do not have to accept injustice as inevitable." Dr. Lisa Parker was already pulling up star charts on her tablet. There are dozens of species in this sector alone that are under the control of various empires and warlords. Most of them probably do not even know that successful resistance is possible. Danny Martinez was grinning again. "So we are talking about a galaxy-wide revolution, teaching everyone who wants to learn how to stand up for themselves. Is that what we are doing?" Jake asked. "It is what we have been doing," Zephyra replied. "We are just talking about doing it more systematically." Jake looked around the academy. In the training halls, beings from a dozen different species were learning that they did not have to be victims. In the strategy rooms, former enemies were working together to solve common problems. In the workshops, engineers from different worlds were sharing knowledge to build better defensive systems. This was not just about military training. It was about changing how an entire galaxy thought about power, justice, and the right to self-determination. A year ago, Jake had been a patrol captain whose biggest worry was finding smugglers. Now he was helping to reshape galactic civilization. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it. But we do it the right way. We offer help to anyone who wants it, but we do not force our ideas on anyone. We teach them to defend themselves, not to attack others, and we make sure they understand that strength exists to protect, not to dominate." As the UES Liberty prepared for its next mission, Jake stood once more on the observation deck. Below him, Kelleros Prime sparkled with new life. The crystal cities had been rebuilt, but now they were defended by beings who understood that beautiful things were worth fighting for. Across the galaxy, the message was spreading from world to world, system to system. Freedom was not something you waited for. It was something you created for yourself. Justice was not something powerful beings gave you out of kindness. It was something you claimed through courage and determination. The Vorthak Empire still existed, but it was no longer the terrifying force it had once been. Other oppressive regimes were discovering that their subjects were no longer willing to accept oppression quietly. And at the center of it all were humans, the strange beings from the death world called Earth who had taught the galaxy a simple but revolutionary idea, that anyone could learn to fight for what they believed in. The age of helpless victims was over. The age of universal self-determination had begun, and Captain Jake Morrison, who had started this whole thing by responding to a simple cry for help, was proud to be part of a galaxy where beings were learning that salvation was something you could create for yourself. The stars were full of free peoples, and they were all learning to defend their freedom. It was a beautiful sight.